Hello everyone and welcome to this week's Talking Stick Show. So I'd like to welcome back onto the show we have Tim Walter. Hello Tim.
Hello Dale, thanks for having me back. It's great. Seems like only yesterday.
It does. It seems like only yesterday, and was it December? It was
I think
December,
so.
wasn't it? Yes, it
Early
was.
December-ish, I think.
Yes, and so we had myself and Laura. We had a talk with Tim before, and it was an incredible conversation. It's available on the page if you look back at the videos as well. And it felt like we only touched the surface. We went into it, and me and Laura left the conversation like, wow, there was so much more to talk about, and we really look forward to another chat. And here we are today.
Yeah, after a build-up like that, you might well end up like, oh, okay, right, what are we going to talk about now?
There we go. So for those who aren't aware of you, Tim, tell the listeners a bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, my name's Tim Walter. I'm a house healer and alternative life coach. That's the sort of label that I use to describe myself. Basically, some decades ago, actually, my life changed completely in 1998. So it is decades. I became more aware of the subtle energies of place. We moved into a house. We discovered a ghost living in that house, and that led to us picking up dowsing. I say us, I mean my wife and I, learning more about dowsing in order to speak with that disincarnate spirit. And when you get something like that happening, although it was a very slow and gentle process of change, it does make a massive difference, because you suddenly realize the world is not what I thought it was. The world is not what it seems. And that really was the beginning of my journey to understanding more about the fact that we come down and visit this three-dimensional reality, as spirits within the physical body. And when we adopt that viewpoint, then a lot of things change in the way that we relate to life, the universe, and everything, quite frankly. So I work as a house healer. I work on the disassociated, the disharmonious energies of space, of a place. In other words, I work on people's houses primarily as a way to working with the person's energy as well as the house itself. So, excuse me. So although there are some great practices and some great shamanic practices like smudging and bells and feng shui work and all this sort of stuff, we work as house healers. We work really with the management upstairs, with these fields of subtle energy that impact our realities down here, but we are simply using focused intent. So in the way that feng shui is working in a lovely harmonious way to look at the energy flows within a space, we are doing similar, but I kind of feel, and this is not a competition about who's better. Is the house healing better than feng shui? This is actually just about, look, it's a slightly different modality, but I feel as though we kind of go deeply into those energies of creation. And that's, even though we might not sometimes actually understand what we're dealing with, we kind of act in that healing capacity, and we enable some kind of change and shift within a person's reality through associating that work with the management upstairs. And it's them that really does the work, the hands-on nitty-gritty. So we act as a point of observation. That's a start.
Great. And so let's talk about the house then. So let's set up a situation of someone moving home, going into a new house. What's some advice you'd have for people going to a new house, and what to look out for so they can have kind of a more balanced place, really?
Really, all of this stuff is actually not as woo-woo as we might think it is. So, I mean, obviously that expression woo-woo is used in all sorts of different, ways, and a lot of kind of logical and scientific thinkers use it to disparage any intuitive linking into any of this subtle energy. But I use it in the sense of, well, is it mystical? Is it magical? Is it mysterious? Well, it's sort of all of those things. But equally, the most important thing to as far as I'm concerned, is to actually recognize that all of those things are part of being a human being. So when you walk into a new house, ideally, you're doing this process actually before you've made the decision to buy it. You're actually walking into the space. You're walking into a potential new house, and you are literally just, and women are far better at this than men are. You're literally just associating and feeling the energy of the space from your heart, because your heart is the fundamental organ of the body that is interacting with the subtle energies and is in that role of creation all the time from moment to moment. So if you walk into a space and you literally, it's that corny old thing that they have on TV shows where they say, oh, it's the wow factor. Oh, I love it here. I can see myself living it. If you feel all of those positive responses, then it means that you're resonating with that space. You're feeling in harmony with it. If you don't, if you walk into it and you think, oh my God, and you basically want to turn around and walk straight out again, then you don't go near it. No matter how much logic says that's a really good buy, it's a bargain, don't go near it. Just follow your heart. And that, when we talk about fundamentals of all of this, following your heart is absolutely crucial to everything.
So with houses being built, then what I've found is, say the old house, say, have been built 200 years ago to the modern houses being built now. Is there any familiarities you have with the new buildings to the old buildings? Because for me, there was a lot more connection with the land, how houses used to be built. And for now, it kind of seems like all of these new properties get built without even a thought of the land. It's just boom, boom, boom. So what's your dealing with seeing the contrast between both of them and how they are so different now?
Yeah. I mean, it's I've often had conversation with people, following that question of, what do you do? And I say, well, a house healer, and then you explain what it is. And then, usually what happens is that if they're not familiar with this sort of spiritual way of seeing life, then eyes tend to bulge, and they're either really interested or they're like, whoa, this guy's a nutter. Anyway, for those people that are interested, what they normally then say is, oh, well, my house is all right. My house isn't is going to have any problems because it's a new build. It's new. It's not been there for more than 20 years. Exactly what you're saying. It doesn't make any difference. Actually, it's not necessarily about the actual structure of the house. And what you said was its association with the land. If you've got a new build that has been built with some, aesthetic understanding of what shape and space can do in the physical form. So in other words, almost sort of going along the lines of sacred geometry, that helps as a living space. But if it's also been built by people that understand anything to do with subtle energies and recognition of the land having a consciousness of where it's being built, then, I mean, you're onto a winner. Absolutely. Any site that is immediately created and dedicated to assisting and working with the energies of the space, so the spirit of land, the spirit of place, you're going to be onto a winner. It doesn't necessarily mean that when you because of the nature of human beings, taking a spiritual approach and addressing the let's say the guardian spirit of the land, or the spirit of place, or the guardian of the house, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to instantly have a lovely smooth ride, that your life is going to necessarily be trouble free and constantly harmonious, and you're going to be in a really loving relationship or anything like that, because we have to accept that humans are humans. So we sometimes, as we did, we moved into a space and into a house that was there for a very specific reason, to bring information to us, to help us change the way we were living. So sometimes that process of change can be quite rough. It can be quite difficult. It can be, a spiritual awakening is not necessarily a lovely, fluffy thing. But coming back to the house, if you've moved into a new build and you think, well, here I am on a standard estate, and the chances are that the whole estate has been built ignoring any relationship to the land, then the best thing that you can do is to actually start to rectify that for your own space, your own garden plot, and just communicate with the land and explain how you want to develop your relationship with it. and start to plant it and work with it and nourish the land in a very physical sense. So a bit of gardening, where you're actually also talking to and relating your experience and your energy with the elementals that are there for you in that space.
Incredible. So going into dowsing, so with the houses as well and positionings of furniture and looking into that feng shui aspect, what would you recommend for those who were wanting to take up dowsing to look into further their home and the feng shui going on in their sacred space?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a feng shui expert. I've worked with a number of feng shui consultants. They've come on the house healing course, and that's really how I've seen the similarities between their work and the work that we do. And obviously, they've gained quite a lovely amount of additional information from being part of the course. So I'm not a feng shui expert, but hang on, I'll just take some of those words out. One of the great ways to use dowsing, if you can just get a very simple understanding of using a dowsing rod and asking the questions of yes and no, one of the lovely things that you can do is simply go around your house and actually just ask about the placement of objects or the use of rooms. This room here, for example, this is at the end of our house. You talked about an old house of 200 years or so. This is actually 500 years old, this part of the house. So there's a bit of history going on here. It will date back to Tudor times, basically. So this was the natural space for my office, for my healing space and what have you. Now, but if I was new to this and I was new to dowsing, one of the first questions I would want to ask and recommend that people do ask is this space a good space for my office? If it says yes, and then you can ask, well, is there a better, if you've got other rooms that you could use, is there a better room that I could use? Is there a room that is more harmonious to, depending on what your business is? If it's like mine, so well-being practitioner, is this the best space that's harmonious and beneficial for well-being practitioner work? And you might get a yes or you might get a no. If it's a no, then you want to go and explore some of the other options that you've got. But one of the important things is to say that you don't, just because you're asking the management, you're asking the universe for its view. Obviously, we accept that it has a different view to us. And obviously, we also accept that they are they are working on higher vibrational frequencies. But it doesn't mean to say that you have to follow the guidance of the dowsing, no matter what. Because quite often, sometimes there are very practical reasons why you've got a room that is a particular, is the office, or a room that is the scullery, the laundry room or whatever. And so they don't necessarily see the world in the same way as we do. And what you don't want is like your desk shoved across the front door or something like that, something stupid, just because they say that's the best place for it.
And so looking into like water pipes or water under the house, what difference does that have on you living in that space?
Yeah, I mean, all of these subtle energy fields are influential, whether we notice it or not. And the ones that we're concerned about as house healers are the ones that are detrimental to our health. So underground water lines, there was a lot of research that was done on the continent, in Europe, over the decades. And there was, I can't remember his name, but there was one particular doctor who used to basically recommended that his patients didn't go home if they lived with houses that had detrimental water lines crossing in them. And he got to know the area, he got to know his district. So if his patients came in with, likelihood of cancer or something like that, and they lived on a particular street, he was like, no, really, you should don't, can you go and visit your sister or visit somebody else? Don't go back to that environment. Because what basically was found in Germany was that where you've got crossing points of flowing underground water, the vortices that can be created can be disharmonious to some people. But the point is that it's like any medical practice, it's absolutely unique. How does one individual respond to one particular vortices is not necessarily like another person's going to do it. You and I will react differently. Yeah, we do. Sorry, I was just reading Suzanne's comment there. Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah,
question.
so we got Suzanne asking, that's interesting. We do talk to the land, but any other advice? As in, I'm guessing you mean communicating with the land.
Yeah, well, it's the elementals that I would recommend getting in touch with. The elementals, the nature spirits of the land. So I'm not quite sure, Suzanne, whether you're talking to the land itself, because the land itself will, answer you. Will have a spirit, genius loci, it's commonly known as. But the elementals, they're fantastic. If you want to talk to the nature spirits and actually get them on side, I'm sure that we, and a lot of people think this, as human beings, as a human species, we used to run our lives in harmony with the nature spirits, with elementals. And these are, I'm talking about the little people, and air spirits and dryads in the water. These are all personalities that, yes, they can sometimes, sometimes you have to be a little bit on your game, because they do like to play games, and they can be a little bit tricksterish sometimes, but usually for fun, just out of that kind of childish, childlike sort of zest for excitement. But the elementals, yeah, dive in and talk to the elementals. And if you're Suzanne, if you're talking to the land simply by just being in that space of just allowing yourself to coordinate, dowsing doesn't necessarily need to be done with a rod and a pendulum or anything, or any tool at all. You can be just simply tuning in and being aware of and using your intuition to connect. Then just carry on doing that, because again, you're opening your heart to the space, and therefore whatever comes to you in that space, as you do that, if you're directing your attention towards what you perceive to be the little folk, then that's what you'll connect with. That's what you'll connect to, and they'll love you for it. Absolutely love you for it.
So, Susan, we live in the burial mound in the woods.
Yeah. Okay. So with the burial mound, so what's really evident is that the ancients knew far more about earth energy, so the flows of subtle energy across the landscape, and were more aware of the way that it was an influence upon the harmony of experience of being alive. So what over here in Europe, well, you've got them in the States as well. I'm not sure where you are, Suzanne, whether you're in the USA or in Canada or UK.
She's in UK, Doncaster, okay. I think, yeah.
Oh, excellent. Okay, good. I say good because it's northern. So Neolithic stone circles are, the classic item that was built by the ancients, thousands of years BC, around about 4000 BC was the classic time for a lot of this Neolithic work. And what appears to be the case is that they were built with an understanding of the subtle energy that was flowing across the land. Now, this is important because the subtle energy links us to the land. It links us to the productivity of the land. It links us to the health of the land. It actually gets a little bit kind of like Arthurian in talking about it like that, where, King Arthur being connected to the land. And of course, in that, you've got Merlin as well, the magician. But the reason that the King Arthur myth is so astonishingly strong is because there seems to be an underlying mystical truth to it, that we are so innately connected to the land. So the burial mound, a lot of burial mounds were adopted as places for special people to be buried. They weren't necessarily built as burial mounds. So a lot of burial mounds are known as barrows. And they were quite often either places for meditation and connection and shamanic work, as we would call it now, underground, so in the darkness of the space within the earth. And then later on, it's like, well, the tribal leader has died, or the wise man, the woman, or whatever has died, and therefore let's put that body in a special place. Oh, well, of course, let's put it in there. Let's put it in there. And so archaeology generally labels a lot of these sites as burial mounds, rather like they label virtually anything that's on the top of a hill that looked as though it was an enclosure of some sort. They'll label it as a fork. Well, I'm not being down on archaeologists. I actually find archaeology quite fascinating, but it's just that because most of them haven't got the understanding or any understanding of subtle energies and the way that the ancients certainly appeared to work with that and the land, then they don't see what they see today as being symbolic of that spiritual connection. Some do, of course, some do.
Did you see the Netflix Graham Hancock documentary?
I haven't actually.
I'd highly recommend watching that. So he studied archaeology, and he was finding that in some of these pyramids, well, a lot of the pyramids were underlaid with other pyramids below that, buried beneath, and it wasn't mixing up and connecting to the actual archaeology of the modern society. So he was blacklisted, and everyone said don't listen to him. And he basically goes into the land and how there were so many different civilizations who have been here before, had the technology of the pyramids, and we're only shown a certain part of it, and there's a lot more to be understood about it.
Yeah. I mean, Graham Hancock's brilliant. I mean, he really is. I mean, I'm aware of his other work. I haven't seen that particular documentary. I think it's fantastic if Netflix are hosting something like that. That really is good news. He has done a lot of work on that. On the megaliths of the past and our connection to them. There's also a fantastic book. So it's a bit dated now, and it might be out of print, so therefore it'd be quite expensive. But there's a book called Stone of Knowledge, Seed of Plenty. I can't remember who the authors are, but that is about the experiments that were done. Again, I think it was about 20 years ago, with modern people working with standing stone circles, and the effects that the stones were having on the crops, and that really is what the ancients knew about. And when you get into the big spiritual sites, like any of the big pyramids, and I mean there are of course pyramids, as you know, there are pyramids all over the world that go back way further than 4,000 years. I can't remember when the Egyptian pyramids were built, the Great Pyramid, but there's a fantastic site in Eastern Europe, isn't there? Is it Turkey? Göbekli Tepe, it's called.
Yes.
Which is causing a lot of interest even amongst standard archaeologists, partly because there's loads of pyramids there. So the pyramid shape, again, I'm not an expert on sacred geometry, but the pyramid shape does do some really interesting things in terms of connecting us again to those energies.
So with listening to you and having you on the show before and listening to some of the material in the past, you've got a lot of trust and a strong connection with spirit. So for those listening, from your own experience, what has it been like connecting through spirit through these years? And is there anything you've learned from doing that? I know that's a question which you could go on forever about, but just going into it.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I think the best way for me to answer this actually is just to relate to something that I was doing really recently, a couple of weeks ago. I've actually been ploughing through my old videotapes, my professional videotapes that I shot with Hamish Miller and a group of people. When we did the research, we filmed a program called The Spirit of the Serpent in 2003. We filmed Spirit of the Serpent, which was it was like a time team investigation, but for subtle energy, based down in the Merry Maidens, which is a stone circle in Cornwall. And we were filming there for 3 days. And leading up to that, I interviewed Hamish. Hamish Miller was a great dowser and author and amazing guy. And I was just recently looking at this footage, and I came across a section of an interview where I was doing with Hamish, and I asked him about his spirit guides. And his answer was, it surprised me just 2 weeks ago because I'd completely forgotten this part of the interview. And he said, I don't think I've got guides anymore. I think they've given up with me. They've kind of moved, gone
Moved
away.
house.
They moved house and gone away. And he was saying it in such a humble manner because that was just the way that he was. And I, at the time I was just saying, oh really? Oh, okay, that's interesting. And yeah, I mean, and it is interesting. But you know what? There was a period in my life recently, a few years ago, where my spirit guide, who used to, because I practiced to the extent of allowing him to come through me and to talk through me, and I sort of got almost to a stage where I would be willing to talk to clients channeling. So he would be present, not Tim Walter. And he was an archetypal figure, Merlin, basically. I knew him as Merthin. But so I was doing this trance channeling, trance mediumship. And he still shows up every now and again. But it's absolutely not in the same way as it was through all those years of learning to work with him as a personality, to find out more and more about spirit and what was going on. And it's almost like, I suppose part of it is that I wasn't willing to step up and say, okay, I can do this. I can be a medium. I'm going to, step out there and do the mediumship thing, because that's just not me as a personality. Right. I mean, I wasn't prepared to do it. But equally, he's still there. I know he's still here. He's still here as part of my spirit team. And he still absolutely gets involved in the house healing work. And when I'm dowsing, because what we do is, for those that don't know, we work with a floor plan and we work remotely, so we can work with a client anywhere in the world, and we access the energy of the space through the dowsing, so you focus intent through that. But when I'm focusing in like that, what actually happens is that I almost, he basically kind of comes in, and so I see in me, it's almost like he's doing it. So it's almost like, so the impression, the information I'm picking up, I'm holding the pendulum here and kind of concentrating, which is why he's staring at the top of my head. But that act is actually allowing the energy of him to pick up the information and bring it out through into 3D blah. So I think the big thing now, the big thing about this is actually, as human beings, we are not just the human being. We're not like a lump of stone that is just like, okay, there it is, right? But do its stuff. You do your stuff, Tim, or you do your stuff, Dale. You be Dale. Go on. What you're actually doing is you're actually just a container, a field of energy, really, that is just playing host from moment to moment to different emotional resonances that are appropriate for it's not even where you are, it's where, what, who. I mean, you don't even want to use the three-dimensional references. It's just in that moment, you're playing host to love, or you're playing host to anger, or you're playing host to all the barrage of fears and the combination of frequencies that make up the way that we express ourselves as human beings. Now, when you've got spirit, they don't come with the baggage. They are baggage free, and they have a completely different feeling, and obviously, as we said before, a completely different perspective on life and information as it is. And they help us. And so therefore, spirit guides, in the sense that Hamish was using it, that term of spirit guides will most often appear for you when you need them to be there, when you are going through the transitional phases of life, or if you're wandering too far from actually managing to hit the set points that you've agreed to before you come down and been incarnated. So they'll come in and go, hang on, over here, this way, because they still got to abide by three-dimensional laws that we live by. So most of the time, most spirit personalities are absolutely benign and loving. They do, however, reflect your own co-creating spark. And if you're somebody that has a specific role in this life to be a disruptor, or to just simply to be present so that others may learn certain lessons, and your role is to simply be that element that is basically pretty solid and kind of, static in its approach, so that other aspects bounce friction full off them. In other words, you encounter a lot of friction. Then basically, if you're that sort of person, and that doesn't mean to say that you're not an evolved being, you can be a very highly evolved being and take up that role. You could volunteer, you might have volunteered for that before you came down here, which fine. But what I'm saying is that sometimes those sort of people that face a lot of friction will encounter a lot of friction when they encounter spiritual beings as well, because it's that resonant thing.
And that's it. It's that friction and using like discernment skills to be able to communicate to them and feel for what their intention is. I've met many different spirits around, people, clients, ranging from the really heart space ones, ranging from the medium ones, ranging to the really dark ones who basically want to kind of have been feeding off the client's energy and stuff like that. So let's talk a little bit about ghost and the separation and difference between a ghost and an ancestor spirit. And from your findings and doing the house healing and the clientele and stuff like that, what was your understanding of these ghost spirits with difference to the ancestors?
Yeah, well, ancestor spirits, ancestor energies are to me are more about the aspects of a person. So if we looked at my case, then my father's energy is, I'm very attached to his energy, but there are aspects of his spiritual ancestral energy that I might well be affected by, that I had no idea of in the human existence, but it was there. And these things can, if you think even like guilt from religion, let's say, that as an energy for the generation above mine and the generation above that, this sort of thing can set up quite a strong flow of energy from person to person to person. And so therefore those sort of hidden detrimental things are aspects of ancestor energy that to me are not necessarily, the way I interpret it, is not necessarily being presented as a personality. Now they might be, if you're the sort of medium that picks up personalities at the drop of a hat, then yeah, you can imagine the sort of personality that might form. So ghosts, spirits, trapped souls, this sort of thing, and that sort of arena is one of the section headings that we cover fairly early on in the house healer training, because they can have a massive impact on the individual or family living in the space. So ghosts, and again, these are, they might fall in line with your interpretation of them, but they might not. And it doesn't matter if they're slightly different, because, we absolutely are talking about a very ephemeral section of our reality. So ghosts to me are more like recordings that are held in a space. So they're more like, I'm not sure if I mentioned this one before. I might have done. I had a client very early on, as one of the most typical examples of ghosts and their energy. I had a client really early on who at this, I think it was 11 o'clock at night, he would get a knock on the door, and he would go to the door and there would be nobody there. So, clearly that is a ghost. That's a replay happening on a kind of a set loop. And what I did in that instance was to understand that, oh yes, okay, so he's getting these knocks regularly. This was about somebody coming to the door to actually tell the person that was living there. I think it was to do with the First World War, actually. So it was the news of somebody in the family had died; they'd been killed, and that shock, that emotional shock, has been left as this continual loop. It's a bit like Groundhog Day, you've got the same old action occurring all the time, but it's manifesting for my client in this instance in that knock on the door, and he would answer it and nobody was there, but he would hear the knock on the door. That to me is a ghost. That's the sort of ghost thing, right? So when I describe the lady that was in the house, the disincarnate soul that was in the house when we moved into it in '98 as a ghost, yeah, she was like a ghost when we first encountered her. But because she very quickly started to be telling us far more about the spirit world and introducing us to the idea of earth energy flows, and she announced herself as a guardian as well, you know, very early on. She was like, I'm actually a guardian here, blah 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 blah. Then the role of ghost actually sort of, that kind of becomes, she's not really a ghost. She's more of a devic energy, which is what we would allocate as being a personality responsible for a space. Devic realms related very much to the angelic realms as well, but fundamentally that she was a person that had volunteered to come back and take that role of guardian of the space. So ghosts, I tend to say, are recorded in the space that people live. Spirits tend to be, yes, they can come and go, and they're absolutely everywhere. You know, people say, I think I've got a spirit. Well, yeah, I mean, the fact is, consciousness is fundamentally spirits in potential, right? So what I mean is that if you go looking for spirits in the space, and this applies with dowsing as well, then you will find spirits, because you will find people. Consciousness, we're fantastic containers for consciousness. We're one of the, we're right up that scale. Animals clearly are conscious, and I mean, we talked about stones and standing stones, but stones are conscious. I mean, even the stones in your garden are conscious. If you wait long enough, you can have a conversation with a stone, but you have to wait a fair time. So that's one out of your garden. If you go to a standing stone circle, then actually you'll get a response quicker from the stones. And what you'll find is that those stones at a standing stone circle, because they've been created, they've got a purpose and all the rest of it, and they've worked in resonance with shamans over the centuries, then they'll be buzzing. They'll be, again, like kids. They're like elementals. You can have a great conversation with a lot of stones.
And that ancient knowledge in the stone, as the stone people are the stone keepers and the record keepers of our time, and what they've been able to see and what we've gone through are all recorded in those stones.
Absolutely, yeah, because it's all there in the consciousness fields, the fields of consciousness, and stones are terrific at just being and lasting, and as you say, they're there through the centuries, eons. So spirits. So if you go looking for spirits, you're going to find spirits. We often find spirits in houses, even when people don't, they say, well, but we're not haunted. Well, no, you don't have to be haunted. As far as I'm concerned, a spirit is an aspect of consciousness. It is there, and you will always find them. Jane, our guardian in the house, described earth energy lines as rows of people just lined up. It's like consciousness just lined up. So it's like a bus queue, an earth energy line is like a bus queue of people in potential. It's all there. So spirits come in many, many different forms. And go on.
So when we look into, say, a house and we have those feelings where we look at a certain room and there's something negative in there, or potentially there might have been someone who died in that area, what would you recommend for being able to work with that room itself to kind of clear up the energies into a neutral, balancing way? Because I know a lot of people have this with a house. They'll have an old house and there'll be one room and they'll just say it just feels horrible in this room. What would you recommend for people to be able to clear that?
Yeah. Well, again, this comes back to heart-centered focusing, heart-centered work, because, if we kind of take a step back and say, well, actually, even I don't really need to go there, but this is the angle I'm just going to briefly outline, then we'll talk about it in more practical terms. So, if you take the step back and you actually acknowledge that the external environment isn't really external at all, it's all being generated from within you, as within each of us as a co-created being, and therefore that's why the experience of living here in the 3 dimensions is not what it seems. It's because we actually are creating everything we experience. So if we take it from that perspective, then actually, as we open our heart, then we're changing the energy vibration of what we're experiencing, and therefore we can move it on. But in practical, terms, because that's kind of like a bit, oh, hang on, that's just done my head in. In practical terms, you find that you've got a cold room, you find that you've got a cold space in a room. And, let's say you've confirmed that it's actually a spirit of, again, okay, let's say somebody's died there, but just because somebody's died doesn't mean to say that it's going to be a nasty feeling place, but let's say that it is. So if you want to work on it yourself, then even just doing the smudging or ringing of the bells, anything that actually just helps to disrupt the energy in the sense of dusting. So it's like, we go around and we do a dusting of a room. I should do more in here, actually, comes to think of it. But we do a dusting, and that's like smudging or ringing the bell, and that'll help loosen it off. And if you've got the intention of just asking that energy to, just visualize it, it doesn't matter how you want to visualize it, just asking it to move, literally ask it to go to the light, even if you don't have any experience of this, you just ask it, and just so therefore your intention is operating on the process that is set up to operate on. Right now, if you want to get a bit deeper with it, then and if you're a bit more experienced meditator or encountered these things before, then really meditating into that situation. So meditating on that situation and really connecting to that spirit. But again, this is what I'm saying, this is for a little bit more advanced, something that's a bit more advanced. And you can then have the conversation with that spirit and explain to them where they are, find out more about them, and just talk to them like they're a three-dimensional human being. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're asking the management upstairs to open the portal to allow the light to come through, so that this being can see where it's going to go. And it might be that being, that spirit, says something like, "Well, I'm not going through there because I end." Well, okay, there are so many reasons why they might not want to go through that portal, but actually, if you can then just but you just discuss with them the fact that there is no judgment when they go through, and it is a pathway through to a heaven, and the only judgment that ever takes place is actually an assessment by yourself on your own actions. That is the judgment that occurs if it's applicable. So, and we don't know exactly what vibratory level that they might be going to, because there do seem to be different levels of heaven. I was having a conversation with an author called Joseph Selby the other week, and he was describing how Hinduism, for example, has these many different layers of heaven. So it seems to equate to how you've lived your life, as to what vibration you pick up on the other side. So, does that answer your question? I've actually forgotten what you asked.
Yes, it does. It does answer the question. Greatly put. And so, for those who are aware of the home and wanting to connect to the ancestor spirits or the actual land itself, so you're saying the dowsing rod's kind of like the medium for them to be able to do that communication through heart space awareness. So, for those listening now who are wanting to start using dowsing, what would you recommend for that, going into that communication process?
Yeah, because I come with the label of dowser, so everything that we are discussing is kind of related to dowsing. But quite often, dowsing, as I said earlier, perhaps, it needn't actually involve the dowsing rod or the pendulum or a bobber or whatever. You can just be dowsing yourself or looking for an answer intuitively. And we talked about mediumship, and dowsing and mediumship definitely are interchangeable and can merge. So for a novice dowser, because I tend to find that everybody that's got some experience of spirituality, if they've been looking into it for any length of time, then they will have come across dowsing. Now, they may have decided, well, it's not really for me, but dowsing, so to me, that's not a novice dowser, because if they've got some experience of spirituality, and that means that they've got an intuitive connection, which means they understand in principle what they're doing, right? And so they understand the benefit and the importance of setting the intention when you're accessing the spiritual space deliberately. You want to set it to basically access it as high as possible, as you know, as high as you can at that particular moment or at that stage of your path. So because you don't want to be accessing the lower trickster energies that are just, you know, going to be a pain, because they are there, and there's no point in saying, oh no, they're not. Well, you know, they are. And you don't want to be linking to those. So for the newbie dowser, and the important thing is that dowsing is the safest way to access any of this spiritual energy, any of this subtle energy, because it's very, very close to the day-to-day processing. You know, and what we're doing when we're dowsing, we're fundamentally asking a question to get a yes or a no response, and then we're thinking about a very specific question to again ask another question. So every time we think of the question, we're actually coming back out of the spiritual connection. Sorry, just waggled the whole desk. We're coming back out of the spiritual connection into the logical day-to-day thinking mode. So we're constantly flip-flopping between the two kind of ways of thinking, right? So it's very close to day-to-day work. And the more experience at dowsing you get, the deeper you go, and your dowsing kind of changes, or it probably does. And especially if you follow spiritual dowsing, then you kind of get into the dowsing itself almost becomes irrelevant. You're just going with the conversation that you're having with the space or being. So as a novice dowser, if you've literally just spent a couple of bits and you've got a couple of dowsing rods, then you can simply ask guardian energy of the house and see what experience, what conversation, what type of conversation you get as a result, which will probably just, to start with, you'll just get the yes and no from the rods. You know, I'm doing that because, I mean, you know, so you'll get I've got one over there.
You've got the finger rods going on.
The finger rods going on. But you can just ask the question and get the yes response. If you've got two rods, they'll both go together for a yes. For a no, it's outwards. Now, as a novice, that might be just all you get is simply the movement of the rods. But as you practice more and more and more, then you'll get more information. And as I say, you'll get less involved in the actual movement of the rods and more involved in the internal dialogue. But the thing is that as you ask for the guardian of the house, what you're expecting to find is a loving being. You're expecting to find a loving Devic guardian energy that is there, that actually has huge amount of compassion, huge amount of love. And quite often these are beings that have chosen to come back and take up this role. So if you get anything that is slightly like, you know, little bit awkward giving you answers, or a little bit you're feeling in here, feeling a little bit unsure about that, then the chances are that's not your guardian energy. That's not your guardian of the space. That you know, you just want to be a little bit cautious about where that conversation goes. If you get something that says stupid things like, well, you're going to die tomorrow, then just back off, just completely shut down the connection. And people say, well, how do you shut down? Well, you know how you've opened up, because you've opened up, you know, you literally have opened your heart chakra and all of that. So just visualize closing down, put a nice big barrier down between you and it, or in other words, basically the space around you, and just put it down for a while, for a few days. Don't bother picking up the dowsing rods again, because that energy will dissipate. And you know what you've done is you've shown that you know that it's a stupid, annoying, stupid trickster. I mean, tricksters can be quite fun, but you know, not when you're learning, and not when they actually
not when you try to get into the like, you're going to die tomorrow, and you're like, oh
exactly.
fuck, maybe I shouldn't have tried this.
Exactly. And so that's the one reason why I sometimes feel a little bit like, maybe I shouldn't be able to do this. But the point is that as long as you've got your wits about you, and you don't fall for, you know, it's a bit like a kid suddenly sort of turning up at the ice cream van and saying, oh, you're going to die tomorrow. Well, you wouldn't pay any attention to that. So don't get freaked out by, you know, by a little being that you've kind of opened up to. Because most of those trickster energies, I don't want to get too sidetracked on it. They have no consequence, really, at all. Not at that level, and you're not going to hit any big time serious nasties at that level of dowsing. That you can only. We have our own spirit guides, even whether we don't know them, right? Even if we don't know them, and so those spirit guides are always filtering out what we encounter. And if it's going to be useful to us to encounter a trickster energy, then they'll let it through. And what they don't let through is the big boys, big girls. They don't let the big stuff through until you're ready for it. So
And that's it. When you were talking then about that feeling, so when you're connecting to an ancestor or a spirit, if you get any of that discernment where it doesn't feel good, you feel cold, it feels nasty, having that disconnection process fully and allowing a disconnection to happen from you making that full conscious choice, instead of going into fear and being like, oh, fucking scared, because sometimes I've done that on my start of my journey. But it's to know that you are the person who has the authority to be able to disconnect from them, instead of getting all scared in fear and so on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because the last thing that you want to be accompanying you in any of this space is fear, because all you're doing is dipping yourself into more fear, and that's a recipe for disaster. So you don't want to be doing that. And if you're fearful of any situation that you encounter, then you back out of it straight away. You don't try to brave your way through it. This applies to anything, especially when you're learning, especially in the early days. You don't brave your way through it. You back out, and you treat it all with respect. You just as you would walking down the high street. I was going to say something there, but it's gone. So. No, don't know what that was.
Yeah, so we were talking about the disconnection process, and you have the authority and right. Conscious choice to just disconnect from them, and a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, that is exactly the point, Dale, because it's about recognizing your power as your being, your absolute true self, which is that actually you are the one that has the say so. You're the one that says yes or no. This is allowed. This is the rule of my universe. This is my universe. This is what I say goes. Right now, yeah. So things are going to come up, and gently along the line, gently or not so gently, going to question that ability and that authority. But that is the truth, is that in a very real sense, you have the God essence, or the goddess essence, however you want to put it, within you, which means, ultimately that line goes back to the ultimate creator. So God, goddess, however you want to frame it, that same energy is you and your experience of being alive. And as we access the subtle realms, we are making use of and connecting to the God or goddess essence within us, which says we have the power to say yes and we have the power to say no. It's our choices. That's the absolute key. That is a conscious choice. So if we're bullied by things because we are conditioned to think that we don't have that power and authority to say no, then we're letting, we are literally giving our power away. We are literally allowing, say, oh, that's what you want to do. Oh, I'm going to roll over and be terrified. I'm going to, I might sound as though I'm being a little bit kind of flippant about it, but it's actually, it's the real crux of what we're talking about.
And that's it, and it's very well put, that we are aware when we learn sovereignty and true the art of being a sovereign being able to have choices. I run into clients as well who are in fear about so many things in their life, and they're scared about the unseen world, they're scared about this and that. What would you recommend for those who are in fear to come and flip the frequency? Because I feel like you've talked about a lot is the universe, what we give out, the universe gives straight back to us. What we look at looks back at us. And when we're in that fear state, we're attracting the fear to come straight back out at us. It's like demons. When you're looking at demons all the time, what's going to stare back at you is a demon. But when you're looking into living a heart space life, living awareness of being in that common sovereignty feel, you're going to attract all this I'd say, dharmic kind of more energy around you.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. This is the time in history when the big shift is occurring. You'd have to be completely out of touch with everything to not see the massive shift that's taking place. Now, actually, I don't know whether that is because we are so many of the people that I encounter, so many of the people that you encounter, because you're in that space, you're in that focused arena of change, whether it is purely because we are on our journey that we see the world around us is also waking up to the journey that is potential for them. Okay, that's a different circumstance to the world is a separate thing and everybody's changing, right? Do you see what I mean? So the first example is the spiritual being changing the external world, and therefore it resonates at that level of heart focus. Yeah, what you said. It can't be overstressed. I say it so much, but it can't be overstressed that if you live from compassion, then that is what you will experience. It's as simple as that. There is no other way of putting it. That's why I was struggling with how do I put this, because actually it's as simple as that. And that's really what you said. If you stare into the face of demons, then that's what you'll see staring back. If you're a hater, you'll always be a hater. You'll always encounter haters. So, but equally, it's a little bit unfair when people like us sit around and say that sort of thing, because there'll be somebody somewhere that says, oh yeah, but I've got, so-and-so, I encounter all this shit at work. And it's like, why do, I don't do anything wrong. And there's all this, crap going on. Well, the fact is that we're human beings. And, if we talk about fear, I've lived most of my life in fear of one form or another, and actually coming onto the spiritual path and following this, and it's like it was amazing how much. Oh God, I'm scared of that, and oh Christ, I got fear about that, and dear God, there's fear there too. Oh, that means I'm working from fear as I approach, X, Y, Z. So it's like layer upon layer of this stuff. And that really is, for me personally, has been my journey of trying to get rid of all of that fear. And, consequently, a lot of my clients come to me with, massive amounts of fear. But collectively, that's what we're getting rid of. Now we are collectively realizing that we don't need to live with all of that crap anymore, that fear. And this is why our decisions are so important when we say, no, we don't need that anymore. We understand that. We can put that down. And collectively, these last few weeks, these last couple of months have been really tough for a lot of people, where circumstances individually really focused on specific issues that people have had to kind of come to terms with and say, right, which side of the fence are you going? And I'm not saying any particular fence for everybody. I'm saying for the individual, it's been about, where's your choice? Which way are you going? Which side are you going? Well, is that really you? Is that really you? Or are you going back to what you used to be like, And that can cause some real upset in your life. And we're all going through it, And so I still find myself facing fear and doing things, and I think, oh, hang on, don't do that. I know exactly why I'm doing that and behaving like that, because I'm coming from a place of fear. So, we all do it, and we're human. So just be gentle on yourself.
And that's it. It's about being gentle with yourself. And this is why inner work, and I'd say working on parts of ourselves, which that fear comes from. I know I had a lot of fear, and I say fear about success, or I didn't feel confident enough to be successful. But I had to go through a period of time where I had to look back at all of those parts of me growing up which didn't want to succeed, which didn't want to do this, and I had to be responsible for working on that in a sense. And I feel we've all got these traumas, we've all got these experiences, and whatever we do in this the experience of the now, because we are the person who chooses, it can help our future as well. And for those listening who find it hard to go out the house, feel like everything's against them all the time, it's trying to flip that frequency in a way to realize that you can change, and it's all to do with the choice of the self.
It absolutely is, and it's a lot easier to say than it is to do, of course. But the point is that for anybody that is suffering like that and is caught in those cycles, that there is hope. There absolutely is hope. And the great thing is that, sorry, excuse me, I shouldn't have had that tea. The great thing is that actually, when you start to realize, and gently the light creeps through and starts to make one realize that, oh, you can actually live, you can feel different, and it's okay. I mean, that's the biggest, hardest thing, is to actually feel, oh, is this safe? Is this all right? Not to feel X, Y, Z, because you've had the habit of feeling in a particular way for so long, and actually all your instincts are going, something terrible is going to happen, but it's all right. It's not. It's okay. It's safe. You're safe. We all actually have the right to absolutely live in peace, and it's up to us to adopt that.
And that's it, beautifully put. I see my week now as I try to have a lot more fun now and laugh about so many more things, because I felt maybe 5 years ago as quite a serious person. I was serious in my spirituality as well, and I had to come to that point where I had to just allow me inner child to have fun, because I lost that feeling of funness. And the more I did it through the week, the more my life changed. And I lifted kind of that smug of real seriousness or the woe is me feel, which I used to have.
Well, no, and I mean, a lot of people do, because life can be, it can get pretty serious, and the more you allow it to get serious, then it does rather crush the fun out of it, and that does, it does crush you as an individual, because you're not living your full self. I think I've got a little thing hanging on my board on the wall. It says "Live well, laugh often." That was given to me some time ago. But equally, if anybody's interested in seeing somebody who just innately is enjoying life and with a lot of love and wisdom, then the videos of Hamish Miller, my dear old mentor, that are on my YouTube channel, I've never known anybody and never met anybody that laughed so much. He just laughed with every sentence. He was just like, it's just amazing to be around, because he recognized the tremendous amount of humor that is in the universe. Tremendous amount.
And that's it, the great universal joke. And when you do laugh, let it out. And like, I take the piss out of my friends. We just have fun, because I feel life is serious, like you say, and we're living in a world where we have to pay bills, we have to do this. There's a lot of stress around us all the time, and I feel like that laughter flips the frequency, and laughter's such a high frequency anyway around it. It's like it's healing you, isn't it? It's like an energy healing. Once you go into that state of laughter between each other, you're like,
yeah,
and I'm laughing now from it.
Definitely, it's very true. It's exactly right. It's very, very true. I had a spirit medium friend who she was very, very gifted. She's still around. I'm talking about her in the past tense because I haven't seen her for so long. But she used to do stage mediumship, and she was very, very funny. And so she would be looking to get the crowd laughing before she would even start her mediumship, because, as she said, you get that energy of the laughter and just the whole place goes, raises, and it's terrific. Can't fail to connect.
Beautiful. So thank you again for coming on the show, Tim, and again, I'd like to invite you on at some point in the future. The shows are fantastic, and I appreciate you giving us a time as well.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, Dale. Thank you. Good to see you again. It's been very nice. Thanks for the
And
questions.
we're both rocking the red jumpers, aren't we? And the door in the background. We had a laugh at the start.
Yeah, I think my version of the fox is slightly different to yours, though. I think mine's more about this next time, perhaps. Yeah.
Yes, incredible. So, how can people get a hold of you if they want some house clearings or house healings? If you'd like to give them your details.
Yeah, then the website is www.knightsrose.com. That's KNIGHTS, rose as in the flower. So it's ancient, Don't know why I'm saying this. It's the knight in shining armor and Rose the flower, both together.com. knightsrace.com, or dig out the YouTube channel. Go onto YouTube and do a search for Tim Walter House Healer or Tim Walter Dowser, and you'll find me. And I think we're connected on YouTube, aren't we, Dale?
Yes, we are. And there'll be details as well I'll post under the YouTube video connecting to his channel as well, to go and follow that. So thank you so much, Tim. It's been a great show, and thank you again.
Pleasure. All right, take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for watching.